Greetings, warrior. There is a prison that has no walls, no guards, and no locks, and yet most men will spend their entire lives inside it without ever once questioning whether the door was open all along. It is not built from steel or stone. It is built from something far more durable and far more difficult to escape. It is built from the accumulated weight of other people's opinions, from the invisible but constant question that runs beneath nearly every decision a man makes, every word he chooses, every risk he considers, and then quietly steps back from. The question is always the same, even when it is never spoken aloud. What will they think of me? It is there when you hold back an honest opinion in a room full of people whose approval you want. It is there when you dress a certain way, not because it reflects who you are, but because it reflects who you need others to believe you are. It is there when you stay in the wrong job, the wrong relationship, the wrong version of your life, because leaving would require you to endure the judgment of people who, in most cases, are too consumed by their own insecurities to think about you for more than 30 seconds. The prison is invisible, but the bars are real. And the cost of living inside it, the slow erosion of authenticity, the exhausting performance of a self that was designed for an audience rather than for a life, is one of the heaviest prices a man can pay. The Stoics did not stumble onto this problem. They studied it, named it, and built a precise philosophy for dismantling it. Marcus Aurelius, who lived his entire adult life under the most intense public scrutiny imaginable, every word analyzed, every decision judged, every action assessed by an empire of millions, wrote privately about the absolute necessity of separating his sense of self from the opinions of those around him. Epictetus, who had been a slave and understood what it meant to have no external freedom whatsoever, taught that the man who depends on the approval of others has chosen a form of slavery that is in some ways worse than the one imposed by chains, because he has chosen it himself, and he can remove it himself if only he will. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius about the courage required to live according to your own judgment rather than the judgment of the crowd, and called it one of the most demanding and most liberating things a man can do. What you are going to learn today is not indifference for its own sake. It is not a philosophy of arrogance or disconnection or refusing to care about anything. It is something more precise and more powerful than that. It is the ability to distinguish between the opinions that deserve your attention and the opinions that do not, and to live with increasing freedom and increasing confidence according to that distinction. It is the ability to walk into any room, make any decision, pursue any goal, and face any criticism without your fundamental sense of who you are being moved by any of it. If you are ready to stop living for an audience and start living for yourself, drop this in the comments right now. I live for myself. Let's begin. Rule 1. Understand what other people's opinions actually are. Before a man can genuinely stop caring what people think, he has to understand at a level deeper than intellectual agreement what other people's opinions actually are. Not what they feel like, not what his nervous system tells him they mean, what they actually are. Because the gap between those two things is where most men lose the battle before it even begins. An opinion feels like a verdict. It feels like a judgment handed down by an authority with the power to determine his worth. But that is not what it is. That is never what it is. And the Stoics were ruthlessly clear about this distinction. Epictetus taught it without any softening. He said that the opinions of other people exist entirely within the category of things that are not in your control, and therefore, by the fundamental logic of Stoic philosophy, they are not your concern. Not because other people don't matter, but because what they think about you is a process happening inside their minds, shaped by their history, their insecurities, their projections, their mood on a particular afternoon, and their own unresolved relationship with the very qualities they are judging in you. It has remarkably little to do with you, and it has absolutely no power over you except the power you voluntarily assign to it. Marcus Aurelius went further. He pointed out that many of the people whose opinions men desperately seek are themselves deeply confused about how to live, that the crowd whose approval you are chasing is largely composed of people who have never examined their own values, who are driven by fashion and fear and the desire to belong, and whose judgment about how you should live your life is therefore worth approximately nothing. This is not contempt, it is accuracy. When you pause and honestly consider whose approval you are seeking, you will often find that you have been adjusting the trajectory of your entire life based on the opinions of people who have given almost no serious thought to their own. The practical shift this rule asks for is a simple but demanding one. The next time you feel the pull of someone's judgment, the anxiety about what they will say, the preemptive adjustment of your behavior to avoid their disapproval, stop and ask yourself one honest question. Has this person demonstrated, through the quality of their own life and their own character, that their opinion of how I should live deserves serious weight? In most cases, the answer will clarify everything. Not because people are worthless, but because opinions handed out freely and without cost are rarely worth the price you are paying to receive them. Drop this below if you're done giving away your power. I take back my power. Rule 2. Stop performing and start living. The second rule addresses what happens to a man's life when the fear of other people's judgment becomes the primary force shaping his decisions. What happens is performance. A performance is not a life, it is a life's shadow, a carefully managed presentation designed to produce a specific reaction in an audience, rather than to express anything genuinely true about the person delivering it. And the tragedy is not just that performance is exhausting, though it is. The tragedy is that a man who has been performing long enough begins to lose access to the authentic self he was performing in place of. He forgets what he actually thinks. He loses touch with what he actually wants. He becomes incrementally and almost invisibly a stranger to himself. Seneca described this dynamic with a precision that is difficult to read without recognition. He wrote about men who shape themselves according to the expectations of many different audiences. One version at home, another at work, another among friends, another in public, and who, in the process of maintaining all these versions, never develop a coherent self at all. He called it the fragmentation of the soul. Not a dramatic collapse, but a slow dissolution. The gradual erosion of the interior life that comes from never allowing it to simply be what it is without an audience watching and judging. The man who performs constantly is never at rest. He is always on, always calculating, always monitoring the reaction. And in the space where genuine presence, genuine connection, and genuine creative power should live, there is only the performance. The cost shows up in places men often do not immediately connect to people-pleasing. In creative work, it shows up as the inability to produce anything original, because original work always risks disapproval, and the performer cannot take that risk. In relationships, it shows up as a persistent feeling of not being truly known, because the people in his life know the performance, not the man. In decision-making, it shows up as paralysis, because every option is evaluated not by what he genuinely wants, but by what will be most acceptable to the most people. These are not small inconveniences. They are the symptoms of a life that has been hijacked by the desire for approval. The antidote is not recklessness. It is not the performance of not caring, which is just another performance. It is the quiet, consistent practice of asking, before each decision, large and small, what do I actually think about this? What would I do here if no one was watching and no one would ever know? The answers to those questions, followed honestly over time, constitute a life, a real one, yours. Drop this below if you're done performing. I show up as myself. Rule 3. Let criticism reveal your character, not define it. The third rule confronts the specific moment that undoes most men, the moment criticism arrives, because all of this is manageable in theory and in the quiet of a reflective morning. But then someone says something dismissive about your work. Someone questions your choices in front of others. Someone offers an opinion about your life that is cutting or unfair, or delivered with an edge that makes it clear it was designed to wound rather than to help. And in that moment, everything you have told yourself about not caring what people think is tested in a way that abstraction never could. The Stoics did not avoid this moment. They prepared for it deliberately and specifically. Marcus Aurelius wrote about criticism with a clarity that only comes from a man who received it constantly and at the highest possible volume. He said that when someone criticizes you, you have two things to examine. First, are they right? If they are, you owe them gratitude rather than resentment because they have given you accurate information about something you needed to address. If they are not right, if their criticism is based on misunderstanding, on projection, on malice, or simply on ignorance of the full picture, then their words are not about you at all. They are about them. In either case, the criticism does not define you. It reveals something, either about a genuine area for growth on your part or about the interior world of the person delivering it. Epictetus was blunter still. He asked his students to consider what it would mean to be disturbed by the opinion of someone who did not know them. If a man who had never seen you fight told you that you were a coward, would you be wounded by it? Of course not, because you would have direct knowledge that his assessment was simply inaccurate. The Stoic practice is to extend that same logic to all criticism. You know who you are, you know what you have done and why, you know the standards you are holding yourself to and whether you are meeting them. The opinion of someone who does not have access to that knowledge, which is almost everyone who will ever criticize you, is assessment without evidence. It is noise. And a man who has developed genuine self-knowledge does not need to argue with noise. He simply lets it pass. What criticism can legitimately do is serve as a prompt for self-examination. Not because the critic is always right, but because any strong reaction, anger, defensiveness, the immediate desire to explain yourself, is a signal worth attending to. The Stoics taught that a man's reaction to criticism often reveals more about him than the criticism itself does. If you are genuinely secure in who you are and what you stand for, criticism may sting briefly, but it does not shake you. If it shakes you significantly, that is valuable information. Not about the critic, but about where your own foundation still needs work. Drop this below if you're choosing to let criticism pass through you. I am unbothered by judgment. The man who has freed himself from the need for approval does not walk around announcing it. He does not perform his indifference or use it as a weapon or make a point of demonstrating how little he cares. You will know him by something quieter than that, by the steadiness with which he holds his own position in a room full of competing opinions, by the ease with which he says what he means and means what he says without calibrating every word for maximum approval, by the fact that he is the same person alone, that he is in company because he stopped performing long enough to find out who that person actually is. That is freedom, not loud, not dramatic, just real. Rule 4. Build an internal scorecard. The fourth rule is one of the most practical and most transformative shifts a man can make in how he evaluates himself and his choices. Most men operate on an external scorecard. Their sense of how they are doing, whether they are succeeding or falling short, whether they are on track or losing ground, is calculated almost entirely from external inputs, what others say about them, how they compare to the people around them, whether they are receiving recognition, approval, status, validation. The external scorecard is seductive because it is immediate and because it feels objective. Surely if enough people agree that you are doing well, you must be. But it is neither objective nor reliable. And a man whose sense of himself rises and falls with the external scorecard will spend his life on a roller coaster that someone else is operating. Warren Buffett, who built one of the most successful careers in human history, described the distinction between an internal and external scorecard with a simplicity that cuts straight to it. He said, "Would you rather be the best lover in the world and have everyone think you're the worst, or the worst lover in the world and have everyone think you're the best?" The question seems absurd, but it reveals something important. The man who chooses the second option has chosen the appearance of quality over its reality. He has chosen the scorecard over the performance, and that choice, extended across a life, produces a man who is very good at being perceived as good, and very little else. The Stoics built their entire ethics around the internal scorecard. Marcus Aurelius asked himself, repeatedly and with genuine rigor, not whether his decisions would be praised, but whether they were right. Not whether his actions would be admired, but whether they were aligned with his values. He had access to the most powerful external validation machine in the ancient world, an entire empire whose opinion of him could be shaped by his choices, and he chose consistently to evaluate himself by a standard that had nothing to do with what that empire thought. That standard was his own judgment of whether he was living according to his philosophy. Nothing more, nothing less. The practical shift is to begin identifying with genuine honesty what your own standards for yourself actually are, separate from anyone else's expectations. What does doing good work mean to you in your own assessment when no one is watching and there is no recognition to be gained? What does integrity look like in your specific circumstances? What would you be proud of at the end of a day in which nothing external went particularly well, but you behaved exactly as the person you want to be would behave? Those answers constitute your internal scorecard, and the man who lives by that scorecard is not affected by the external one, because he already knows how he is doing. Drop this below if you're building your internal scorecard. I answer to myself. Rule 5. Choose your circle with ruthless intention. The fifth rule addresses something that most conversations about not caring what people think overlook entirely. The fact that some people's opinions deserve to matter to you, and that part of the work is learning to distinguish between those people and everyone else. Because the Stoic position is not that all opinions are equally worthless. It is that most opinions are not worth the price you pay to avoid them, and that the opinions worth attending to come from a very specific and very small group of people who have earned the right to weigh in on your life through the quality of their own character and their genuine investment in your growth. Seneca was explicit about this. He warned against the influence of crowds, not because people are inherently bad, but because crowds operate by a logic of their own that has nothing to do with truth or excellence or genuine wisdom. The crowd praises what is fashionable, condemns what is unconventional, and shifts its judgment with the wind. A man who shapes his life according to the crowd's approval will always be chasing a target that is moving, and will arrive, at the end, at a destination he did not choose, having lived a life that was not his. Seneca's prescription was deliberate and specific. Choose the people you allow to influence you with the same care you would give to choosing a doctor for a serious illness, not based on how much they like you, based on whether they know what they are talking about and whether they genuinely want you well. The practical application requires a degree of social honesty that most men find uncomfortable but enormously clarifying. When you look at the people whose opinions currently carry the most weight in your decisions, whose potential disapproval shapes your behavior, whose judgment you are most anxious about, ask yourself whether they have earned that influence. Do they know your values, your history, your full situation? Do they have a track record of honesty with you that goes beyond comfort, that includes telling you things you needed to hear, even when it cost them ease? Do their own lives reflect the kind of judgment you want to be guided by? If the answer is no, the appropriate response is not resentment. It is a quiet, internal recalibration of how much weight you assign to what they think. Build a small circle of people who tell you the truth, who want your genuine growth rather than your comfortable stagnation, and who have demonstrated through their own choices that they understand something real about how to live. Listen to those people. Take their feedback seriously. Let their honest assessment of you carry genuine weight. And for everyone outside that circle, wish them well, engage with them humanly and generously, and then make your decisions independently of what they will think about them. Drop this below if you're choosing your circle with intention. I choose who influences me. Rule 6. Embrace the discomfort of being misunderstood. The 6th rule asks something of you that is genuinely difficult, and that most men, even those who have absorbed everything up to this point, still find themselves resisting when the moment actually arrives. It asks you to be willing to be misunderstood, to make a choice that is right for you, and then sit with the discomfort of someone else interpreting that choice incorrectly, without explaining yourself, without justifying yourself, without performing the elaborate self-defense that the desire for approval demands. Because the need to be understood, to be correctly perceived, to have the record set straight whenever someone draws the wrong conclusion about you, that is just the need for approval wearing a different coat. Marcus Aurelius encountered this daily. As emperor, every decision he made was subject to immediate and often wildly inaccurate interpretation. He could have spent every waking hour explaining himself, managing perceptions, ensuring that the story being told about him was the correct one. He did not. He wrote privately about the futility of that effort, about the fact that a man who needs to be correctly understood by everyone around him has placed his inner peace in the hands of an unlimited number of people, each with their own agenda and their own distorted view, and has effectively made it impossible for himself to ever be at peace at all. The Stoic practice here is to develop what might be called the tolerance for misunderstanding, the ability to act according to your values, make the choice that your own judgment tells you is right, and then release any attachment to how it is received or interpreted. This is not the same as not caring about truth. It is recognizing that your job is to act rightly, not to ensure that everyone correctly perceives your rightness. The man who can do his work, live his values, and make his choices without requiring that others narrate them accurately has achieved a level of inner freedom that is genuinely rare and genuinely powerful. You will be misunderstood. Your silence will be interpreted as arrogance by people who expected noise. Your confidence will be read as coldness by people who expected insecurity. Your choices will be judged by people who cannot see the full picture and will not ask for it. None of that is your responsibility to correct. Your responsibility is to know what you are doing and why. That knowledge, held quietly and firmly, is more than enough. Drop this below if you're ready to be misunderstood. I need no one's approval. Rule 7. Define yourself before the world does. The 7th and final rule is in many ways the most important, because it addresses not just how you respond to other people's opinions, but what creates the ground from which that response comes. A man who has never clearly defined who he is, what he stands for, and what he values above all else, is a man whose identity is available to be defined by whoever speaks loudest and most persistently. He is not neutral. He is a vacuum. And nature, as Marcus Aurelius well understood, abhors a vacuum. In the absence of a self-defined identity, the world will supply one, and the identity the world supplies will be built to serve the world's needs, not yours. The Stoics placed the definition of the self at the center of their practice, not the self as a fixed and rigid thing that never grows or changes, but the self as a living commitment, a set of values, principles and standards that you have examined, chosen, and returned to daily as the anchor of everything you do. Marcus Aurelius knew, before he faced any given day, what kind of man he was committed to being. Epictetus knew, despite having nothing the world normally associates with identity and status, exactly who he was. Because his identity was not located in anything external. It was located in his philosophy, his judgment, his choices. And because it was located there, nothing external could touch it. The practical work of this rule is the most demanding and the most rewarding on this entire list. It requires you to sit down, away from the noise and the expectations and the accumulated opinions of everyone who has ever told you who you are, and ask yourself the most important question a man can ask. Who am I actually? Not who was I told to be, not who would be most approved of by the people in my life, not who do I perform for different audiences. Who am I when no one is watching and nothing is at stake and I am simply being the truest version of what I am? The answer to that question, arrived at honestly and with genuine reflection, is the foundation that makes everything else in this list possible. Because a man who knows who he is does not need the world to tell him. He is not threatened by the world's opinion, because the world's opinion cannot reach the place where his identity actually lives. Define yourself. Write it down if you need to. Return to it when the noise gets loud. Let it be the steady thing that everything else moves around. That is not arrogance. That is the most basic form of self-respect, and it is the thing that sets a man free. Drop this below if you're claiming your identity. I define who I am. Warrior, here is where it all comes together. 7 rules, not a philosophy of coldness or disconnection, not a prescription for isolation or indifference to the people in your life who genuinely matter. A philosophy of freedom, specific, earned, and more available to you right now than you may realize. The freedom to make decisions based on your own considered judgment rather than on the fear of someone else's reaction. The freedom to pursue the work, the relationships, and the life that are genuinely yours, without spending the majority of your energy managing an audience that, in most cases, is far too preoccupied with its own anxieties to be watching you as closely as you fear. The men who built this philosophy did not live free of judgment. Marcus Aurelius was judged by an empire. Epictetus was judged as property by people who literally owned him. Seneca was judged by emperors with the power of life and death. They did not escape judgment. They simply stopped allowing it to determine the shape of their inner life. They built, through consistent and demanding practice, a self that was genuinely their own, that did not need external validation to stand upright, that did not require the world's approval to take the next step, that could be misunderstood, criticized, dismissed, and opposed without losing its fundamental stability. That is what is available to you. Not instantly, not without effort, not without the specific discomfort of making choices that some people in your life will not understand or support, but through the same practice that has been available to every man who has ever chosen to use it, the daily, imperfect, consistent work of returning to your own values and letting them be the thing that drives you forward, rather than the thing that everyone else thinks about where you are going. The prison has no locks. It never did. It is held together entirely by a decision that was made at some point to care more about the audience than about the performance. That decision can be unmade. Beginning today. Beginning with one honest choice that you make not for anyone watching, but for the man you are building in the quiet hours when no one is watching at all. Drop this in the comments if you are walking out of that prison today. I live free. And if this gave you something real to carry, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every video on this channel is built for exactly where you are, and there is much more ahead of us. Thank you for being here, warrior. Now return to your day with a steady mind.